Remember back in the day when a game series released only some entries outside of Japan, and the localized titles were changed from the original to reduce confusion, while actually ending up causing more in the future? I know most of you are thinking of two very famous examples, but turns out Namco Bandai was doing this too, even though it was more for copyright purposes, but it's fine, we can pretend for the intro. Tales of Eternia was originally released in America in 2001 as Tales of Destiny 2, as Destiny was the only game released outside Japan so far, which was really awkward when Namco released the actual Tales of Destiny 2 in 2002. Although if this was the only way to actually have this game be released, then I'm glad it happened, because this is a gem. Greatly polished from previous entries, with much improved graphics and a more sophisticated battle system, Tales of Eternia is a step in the right direction for the series, resulting in a great experience full of drama, destruction, trauma, cooking, love, whitewater rafting, and healing the wounds of the past. Today we'll take a look at this game, going over my opinion and showing off things that I thought were cool, and some that I thought were not good. Please note that there will be spoilers for the entire game throughout this video from the beginning, so if you care about that, then I will go and play the game first. Go ahead, it's great fun. Also, for full transparency, I'm playing on the PSP version, which honestly I don't think there's any major differences from the PS1 version, but we'll keep that in mind anyway. And now, without further ado, let's get into it. At its core, Tales of Eternia is a game about resolving the sins of the past, overcoming our differences and prejudices. In the beginning, two Inferians, Reed and Farah, come across a girl named Meredy, who looked different than them and spoke an unknown language, and she is immediately subjected to hatred for this. Meredy is from Celestia, a world found in the sky of Inferia, and the Inferians are not the nicest people. They believe themselves to be the height of progress, with the Celestians being lawless, violent barbarians, responsible for all natural disasters and basically anything bad that happens to Inferia. Which doesn't really make sense when you think about it, but when we see that the royal family sentences the party to death for simply trying to save the world and asking questions, you realise the hatred runs so deep that no one is even allowed to think about it critically. This is a great example of how the game shows how different groups of people may view the same situation differently, and how history is written differently depending on the viewpoint and the situation of the writer. See, on Inferia, Seyfert, their god, is seen as the holy saviour of the land, having defeated the evil Nereid to save their mortal realm, while on Celestia, Seyfert isn't really mentioned too much honestly, while Nereid was said to fight against the oppression of the people. Also, Celestians don't really seem to hold any prejudice against the people of Inferia, which really shows the deeply flawed views that the Inferians hold. Another overarching theme is grief. The three Inferian party members, Reed, Farah and Keele, are connected via not only being childhood friends, but also via a traumatic event that happened in the village many years ago, which resulted in the death of Reed and Farah's fathers, which the children mistakenly believe to be entirely their fault, which is not true, as these kids absolutely did not release a literal god who had been sealed by another god. Meredy also works against her own feelings of grief, as her parents are the main antagonists of the entire game. At first, Balir, her father, is believed to be behind all of the events of the plot, but we soon find out he has been dead all along, and her mother, Giselle, is the real architect behind the Grand Fall, an event in which the worlds of Inferia and Celestia will be pulled together until they collide, resulting in the death of all life and destruction of everything, which will be less than ideal. These events are further expanded upon during the trials of Seyfert towards the end of the game in a way I really liked. You're given hints throughout the entire game that some awful things had happened to each of the party members, but with no specifics up until this point. The trials involve Reed entering the consciousness of a certain character involved, including an egg bearer that the party fights at the beginning of the game, showing how death is a constant in nature, and that even creatures that attack the party have their reasons. Also, screw this random merchant. I wrote in my notes that the one outside the cave seemed nice, but no, I take that back. Leave those bears alone. Why would you do all this for? My favourite of these trials was when we take control of Giselle. showing the events that led to her turning evil. In this section you have to protect a very young Meredy as you attempt to escape from the attacking soldiers brought by Chazelle's traitorous brother. He it is. Chazelle's powerful magic is really fun to use. Meredy is also in these battles, but she's just vibing. She liked to approach the enemies at times too, which stressed me out honestly, and the event culminates in the family being surrounded. Balir sacrifices himself to save Chazelle, and in my personal favourite scene in the entire game, Chazelle gives up her heart to Nereid, releasing its dark power and destroying most of the village around her, leaving only Meredy and Hyades alive, if only to be experimented on to further her understanding of this new power. There's a lot to be said about Meredy's personal journey of being too young to understand what truly happened back then, and her believing that Balir was behind everything, since that's what everyone else seemed to be saying. I am a big fan of Meredy's character arc, but we'll get to that soon. For now, let's talk a little bit about the battle system. This is similar to previous entries, really a more polished version of that which came before. I really liked combat here. It's fast paced, but not to the level you can't understand what's happening. Spell effects also no longer pause battle, which, while helping everything flow a bit better, this also adds an extra layer of strategy, since theoretically you can dodge large spells if you know when and where to go, meaning the boss's giant certain death laser beam doesn't have to be the death sentence it once was. Also, one of my biggest gripes with previous entries has been addressed a little, which is airborne enemies. These seem a lot easier to hit with both basic attacks and arts. The only things I really found annoying were the floating fireball things, since they put out this aura that causes damage and knockback. They were kinda dumb. There's also an added layer of complexity, since you can give specific commands across the party, like prioritize enemies or prioritize healing, but I completely forgot this existed, so it's not really necessary. You can, however, adjust the degree at which a character will use specific attacks, such as adjusting how often Meredy uses her TP or uses physical attacks, which is very useful because Meredy loves to run right up to an enemy, even though Quickie will do it for her. Just stand back there and cast lightning, please. It also has to be said that this game is gorgeous as well. The sprites look so much better than those that came before, and the character and monster designs are much more intricate, even if quite a lot of monsters are horrifying. I did notice that a lot of creatures from Inferia seem to be based more on animal and plant life, like giant bears or these weird eel things, although yes, some of the designs can be a little out there. I tended to find that Celestian enemies were more otherworldly. Like a lot of the designs I found hard to describe even, they're just honestly horrifying. A lot of robotic or synthetic designs pop up as well, like in Chat's basement. I do like this distinction, however, as it really helps to differentiate the battles on both worlds, on top of the different locales and battle themes. Also, my absolute favourite enemy design is the Guardian boss from Chat's basement. It reminds me of like a Gundam, and I just really like the way it moves and looks, and the battle theme honestly really helps. But yeah, that one's my favourite. I would have fought it again a couple of times, honestly. One thing unique to this game is how the party members learn new arts, and there are 3 different ways, with 2 characters using each. Farah and Reed are primarily physical melee characters, and they have two separate levels of melee arts each, slash and thrust for Reed, and punch and kick for Farah. As the character uses arts of each type, their level for that type will increase, meaning that if Reed uses primarily slash arts, then his slash level will level quickly, and he will learn slash arts quicker than thrust. I like this system as it gives players that prefer a certain playstyle more options, rather than giving a player that prefers thrust lots of slash options that they won't like. Reed can also use a variety of different weapons like swords, axes, polearms, similar to Cress and Fantasia, but I kept him with the sword the whole time since that's what worked for me. Keele and Meredy are mages, and they work a little different. Throughout the game you will find greater Kremls, similar to the summon spirits from Fantasia in later games, and after a battle these will help you via the Kreml cages each mage possesses. Depending on the level and position of the Kremls, different skills can be unlocked, so which character has each Kreml is important. For example, Undine by herself can grant the spell Spread, but if you want to cast Heal, then Sylph needs to be in the opposite Kreml, meaning if you want Heal on Meredy, then she needs to have Undine and Keele needs to have Sylph. The Kremls also level up and gain new spells and combos as you get new Kremls. It's a great system in my opinion, since you need to prioritise what abilities you want for each situation, and there's no way to have every single spell available at the same time. Also, the game will tell you after a battle if you can get a new spell, but it doesn't mention what spell or Kremls are involved, so get ready to do some experimentation. It can be a little confusing to start with, but you get used to it pretty quickly. The last two party members, Chat and Max, get their new arts by finding specific characters or objects throughout the world. In complete fairness, I did this literally once with Chat by accident and then never used her in battle. And I didn't ever find one with Max since I ever only used him for the sections you were forced into using him, and then I never invited him back into the party. I do wish they had slightly better options in battle though, as with their limited abilities I doubt they could hold their own compared to the other four members. I mean, I could be wrong. I usually am, to be fair. Let me know if I am, please. Speaking of the world, the environments are vastly improved compared to previous entries here. I'm trying not to compare them to Destiny Director's Cut, since obviously that was a remake on the PS2, so compared to the more top-down, almost tile-based areas from Fantasia and original Destiny, which I haven't played, Eternia really steps it up. Each town is again visually distinct, with easily recognisable landmarks. Each town brings its own unique flavour. Mintche is a university town. Moral is all located inside this giant tree, which is cool. Tunisia has escalators, my eternal nemesis. Not in the game, I just have a completely rational real-life fear of escalators. And Inferia City is home to the royal family, of which only one we support. Princess Arende, we love you forever. Thank you, Queen. Sorry about your fiancé. There's also a great variety of dungeons as well, and the vast majority of these have their own unique gimmicks that can both improve the experience or make it horrible. One of my favourites was definitely Efreet Gorge. I liked the story integration that the area was so hot that Undine needed to cast magic to protect the party, although the time limit did stress me slightly, as I wasn't sure if running out was a death sentence or not. It isn't, thank God, but that would have been nice to know. On the other hand, one I didn't like was Sylph Cavern. In here you have to time your movement so that you can get carried by the wind into the next room, but the timing for these just seemed to be really tight, like not even a second long at times. I just found it frustrating. Also, Sylph beat me on my first attempt, and turns out hitting retry brings you to the start of the dungeon, and that might be playing into my dislike a little. Honourable mentions for my personal dislike dungeon mechanics also go to the first part of the Gnome Mines for that tool switching mechanic. Even though it wasn't that bad, at least we got the card game out of it. And also to an interesting one is Sylph Cavern, which is a board game for some reason. Also, Efreet's Tomb was pretty cool too, what with the various different environments, the scurry places, and the literal descent into hell. It was fun. What I will say, however, is despite maybe not liking the gimmicks, the atmosphere of these dungeons was perfect. The visuals and music really come together to perfectly capture what you would expect in a windy cavern, or a flaming cave, or a mysterious babbling brook. I'll talk a little bit more about my favourite music later on, but just know it's likely all going to be positive. Another thing about the dungeons actually, the vast majority of these have a campsite about halfway through, and the first time you pass through you'll get a little scene of the party resting up, talking about either the current plot to add a few details, or something character building, like Reed cutting up the egg bear you just defeated for emergency rations. The same egg bear that Reed's consciousness will live inside in the future, meaning he felt all the emotional and physical pain that it went through, but hey, let's not tell him that yet. These little scenes do a lot to expand everyone's personalities, and the one underneath Moral Village also gave us my personal favourite line reading of the entire game.
Keele, rude!
Who's the rude one?
Speaking of, now is probably a good time to mention the game's voice acting. It's passable, I guess. I wouldn't say there's anyone with an outstanding performance, and certain characters named Max certainly have worse lines than others.
Miakus to our hearts.
Yeah!
This is the leader of Celestia, Max. We've been waiting eagerly to meet face to face with the ones who tamed the mighty Ice Cramel.
Yeah!
Honestly, since this was in the dawn of games having so much voice acting, I do give it a little bit of a pass. But a large part of the lack of quality definitely has to do with the directions given to the actors. There are a lot of scenes in which the line has a completely different inflection than what would be appropriate. In one of the final scenes of the game, Farah says, "No problem," exactly like she does every other time, even though the situation is completely dire and they're all probably going to die. Honestly, I wouldn't be too surprised if they only ever actually recorded that line a single time, since she says it a lot. Regardless, there were also a lot of good lines, like Reed in the very beginning, being really sassy when it comes to Keele.
Keele? By Keele you mean that crybaby good-for-nothing Keele Zabel?
Even the characters I've mentioned do have other great lines as well, and I think the battle voices are really good, especially Meredy. I really like the way she says lightning. Also, Meredy is the only character who will accept that the stilted line delivery might be a deliberate choice, since Meredy is speaking the Celestian language Melnix the entire time, while the rest of the party is communicating in whatever the Inferian language is called. I don't think they ever give it a name actually. English? Anyway, they can only understand her because of their magic earrings that help because their hearts are in sync, and I like to imagine her unique way of speaking is because her and the party are still getting to know each other, so it all comes across sort of broken. That or the experiments done on her as a child have fried her brain a little bit. And let's ignore that the party can understand the entire Celestian population, because that doesn't line up with my theory and also the game's own logic. They don't know these people, why can't they just speak with this random shopkeeper? What's going on here? Okay, one more thing about gimmicks before we move on actually. This game has a metric ton of minigames. The previously mentioned whitewater rafting, this weird soccer thing that I'm not good at, an actually really interesting battle movement game, getting your train driver's license, bomb throwing, untying ropes in a way that isn't obvious, gambling, naval warfare, Mario Party, and probably a lot more that I either forgot about or missed. And honestly, as much as these are a nice break from everything else, there's just an awful lot of these, and none of them ever return, although I think if they made me park that train again, I would have a mental breakdown. It also, doesn't matter if you feel most of these. You'd imagine if you hit the side too much while rafting the boat, it would explode or something, but I did really badly at that one and lived, so unsure about that one. Anyway, let's take a look at each party member in detail now. Our main protagonist is Reed Herschel, a hunter that lives alone, taking what he needs from nature and ultimately keeping himself to himself. From the beginning of the game, I thought this was just a personal choice and just what he liked to do, but after finding out the truth of the past, Reed was ostracised by the villagers and had to learn to survive by himself, dealing with the fallout he thought that they had caused in his own way, which may or may not have been the most healthy method, but he still has Farah looking out for him at least. After meeting Meredy, he wants to wash his hands of the whole situation at several stages, like when he wants to pass it off to the Inferian army and, well, we saw how that went. Even at the top of Mount Farlos, about to cross to Celestia, he just wants to go home, which, you know what, fair enough. At this stage, anybody would want their life to just go back to normal, although you'd have to think you're too far gone at this point. Thankfully, after seeing Celestia and the trip to Belir Castle, Reed fully embraces his destiny as someone capable of wielding the Aurora art, and commits himself to saving the world. He's also got this thing going on with Farah, which is cute, and honestly, I don't really care about that. I mean, I'm glad they're getting on and all that, but it takes a lot for me to care about a relationship like that. They're no mint and cress. Actually, thinking about it, it's probably because there aren't any skits in this game. Yeah, they had them in the original Japanese, but the English localization took them out. Now all you get is a hint on where to go next on the world map. Honestly, I think that vastly reduces the amount of character development we get, especially for the later characters. And I imagine the original skits definitely touched on Keele and Meredy's relationship as well, but we can talk about that after. In battle, Reed is your typical swordsman, specialising in keeping the enemy occupied while the rest charge their spells. He's, yet again, the only character I controlled throughout the game, and honestly he did a great job. His arts are good at crowd control as well as being high damaging. He also gets access to the Aurora Wall and Slash towards the end of the game. They can only be used when in critical health, and honestly I forgot about them most of the time since I was panicking at that stage, but they did come in clutch several times. Next up is Farah Orsted, the main heroine and monk of the party. While writing up this section, I wrote a part about her being the first character in the series to be this monk archetype, but then I realised that Kong Man literally did this in the last game. I guess I completely blocked him out of my memory, which is strange, because he is literally in this game. Tunisia needs a jump scare warning, oh my god. The main difference here is that Farah has actually received formal training from the monks at a nearby dojo, something she did soon after the tragedy of her past to try and atone, but eventually she came back to the village to help with the farming or something. Now if it had been me, let me tell you, I could have spent a lot of time at this dojo, learning a thing or two if you know what I mean. Anyway, Farah is constantly trying to help people, even before she fully understands the situation, such as in Barol when she accidentally helps a thief, almost leading to her eternal servitude before a pot salesman helps her out. No, he sells decorations, not that other stuff. This need to help stems from the trauma and depression she feels after the events of her past, since she feels ultimately responsible for everything, since she knew there was a monster sealed in Regulus Knoll and still broke in anyway, which, first of all, those kids literally did not do all that, there's no way, and second of all, why was Farah's dad even telling her about the ancient evil sealed down there? That's none of her business, she's like 5. A lot of this information gets pulled out of her via pot salesman's psychoanalysis at several stages. Maybe he just made her feel more calm and relaxed, almost like the words just tripped out of her mouth. Anyway, she cares too much, and this does come to a head later when the group returns to Regulus Knoll, and I really like the arc she goes on. She also obviously really cares for Reed, since she visited him at the lookout every morning at Racheans, rest in peace to the lookout by the way. And she worries a lot about him during the trials of Seyfert, which thank god somebody does, because they sound horrible, and Keele and Meredy are off just doing god knows what, looking at projectors and stuff. We can do that afterwards, at least give him some words of encouragement.
Oh! Somebody! Oh! He needs some milk!
In battle, Farah acts as another physical attacker, although she also gains a few healing spells, and I love that these are given to her via story progress, so as she meets up with certain characters, they teach her how to heal, and this means she has the only resurrection spell for the vast majority of the game, since Keele and Meredy can't learn it until literally the final dungeon, which honestly, could I have gotten that a little earlier? Thank you. She's pretty good. I'll never complain about another healer that can bring extra damage too. Next up is my sweet child who can do no wrong ever and every tongue raised against her will fall, Meredy. Meredy is a Celestian who travels to Inferia to try and save the world, alongside her little blue-green creature Quickie. Honestly, I don't really even know what to call Quickie since I don't think we actually ever find out what species they are. Let's assume they're some sort of dog. Anyway, Meredy can only communicate in Melnix, so for the first part of the game she's just running around saying God knows what, blowing up half of Mintche University in the process, but it's fine. We forgive her. She's still able to communicate a little bit at this stage, since she gets the vague concept of the Grand Fall across, and once the party gets the earrings and moral, she can speak, but it remains sort of stilted and broken throughout the game, as I've mentioned before. She also refers to herself in the third person a lot, which is kind of endearing to me, but it's probably the brain experimentation, honestly. She also just whips out random words sometimes, like Baiba, and I don't know if these have any particular meaning, but I just know that they're the dirtiest swear words in existence. She's quite childish throughout as well, compared to the rest of the party, but as we find out later, in Celestia she's considered fully grown and has her own house and everything. Maybe a previous partner? Oh, there's this guy she has a little thing on with in the first visit to Ayman, but oops. Well, that doesn't end very well. So she settles on Keele for some reason. Girl, please, get some standards. Fun fact, at one stage I thought that Meredy was going to be revealed as a robot, as there's a scene in Tunisia where her and Reed talk about their memories with their parents, and Meredy seems unsure how to feel about them before we see a tiny flashback to her watching the sky with Chazelle. Turns out she was just far too young to properly remember anything nice about her mother, since she merely remembers the horrors. Also, Ayman gets blown up straight after this, so we don't really get to talk about it more. Despite everything, Meredy is a beam of light in the party, and I just absolutely adore her for that. Plus her voice is adorable, and I just love hearing her cast lightning and other spells in battle. I'm obsessed with the way she speaks. As previously mentioned, she's a mage, but her weapon is actually a whistle that she uses to control Quickie, and there's even an accessory you can get to directly control them, but I don't want to endanger this poor creature, so I did not do that. Meredy actually starts with 3 spells that represent the greater Kramels found in Celestia, while Keele starts with those from Inferia, which is fun, but they can use either world's Kramels when they get them because the system would simply have made no sense otherwise. Next is Keele, and my opinion of Keele changes every single time he's on screen. At the start I hated him actually, he was so mean to Meredy and was only helping the rest of the party to further his own goals of learning about the world and getting his researcher position, although eventually he does start to treat Meredy like a human being, but I still find it hard to let those feelings go. Also, even though he wants to learn all he can about Celestia and everything, he point blank refuses to accept any information unless he verifies it for himself, which to be fair, would be a good attitude for a lot of people in the real world to adopt. However, this means he refuses to believe almost anything Meredy tells him in the beginning, but thankfully he remains curious enough to tag along. Or maybe it's his deep prejudice against the people of Celestia and his incredibly rude personality that makes me not like him. Honestly, he really annoyed me in most campsite scenes. Thankfully he softens up about that over time and even becomes what some would call a couple with Meredy. What Meredy sees in him I have no idea, but I guess when almost everyone else you've ever known is dead, you kinda gotta take what you can get. Keele obviously grew up with Reed and Farah in Racheans Village and was part of the whole incident before, but amazingly, both of his parents survived, which led to them sheltering him and pushing him into his studies, not letting him speak to his friends. Unfortunately, Keele's insecurities had already begun by this stage, since Reed was so athletic and Keele had asthma or something, so his intelligence gave him strength, and something that he had to hang over other people, which is probably why he turned into an arsehole. Also, the whole incident doesn't seem to have affected him as much as the rest of the cast, since when they return to Regulus Knoll, he doesn't really seem to remember it at first, while the other two are clearly shaking with fear and regret. Meredy is also there, but she's going to get possessed by the devil in a minute, so she's got her own things to worry about. In battle, Keele is basically the same as Meredy, apart from the initial weak spells he starts out with, and the only real difference between them is that Keele has a slightly higher magic stat, and Meredy has more TP in the end. But also Meredy is nicer and more fun, so like what else could we really want? Also, this is only tangentially related, but I've been watching the original Mobile Suit Gundam, and the 3 kids in that really remind me of Child, Farah, Reed and Keele for some reason. I know those 3 would have ran the white base like the Navy. Okay, the next few are going to be slightly quicker since they have very little substance, I fear. The first optional character is Chat, the descendant of Aifish, the famous pirate. I actually really love Chat's character. She's very proud of being a pirate and is very full of herself, which is great comic relief. I love her fishing for compliments, it's very relatable. I only wish she got a lot more screen time. Also, her house is insane. Why do you have these portraits of the Destiny cast down here?
And since when did I acquire all these portraits of Patrick?
Although she does hate animals and Quickie, so we might have to cancel her. You can get her into your party at any time after getting to Van Eltia, which I didn't realise for the longest time, and you have to go around looking for her arts around the world, so I just never used her. Oops. Let's actually talk about the Van Eltia here, which is the boat you travel around the world in. The boat itself is pretty cool, and after finding various different places Efreet built, you can upgrade the ship to hold both the Aifish and the Eye birds. The Aifish are submarines that allow you to explore the ocean floor of both worlds, which is fun, but there are very little landmarks down here. So in order to find the 10 hidden caves, you just have to wander around for ages. I think the fish and the air bubbles give little hints, but it's not entirely obvious, so I'm unsure honestly. The eye birds can't be unlocked until you've literally entered the final dungeon, and they're essentially just an airship, but they do let you enter some optional areas, so they're a nice gimmick but not entirely needed, although I would greatly recommend doing Efreet's Tomb anyway, since it's a lot of fun. Next up is Max. He's the leader of Celestia, the organisation formed in order to fight against Balir in Celestia. Although he doesn't really make any of the decisions, and just uses his allegedly immense charisma in order to rally together the population. I'm really not a fan of Max. This might be mostly to do with his voice, the fact that most of his conversations consist of him saying, yeah? Or that just before the vault fight, he gets shocked because he touched a giant ball of electricity and starts with 1 health. Any one of those. Take your pick. It is nice that he loves the Magus creatures since his ex-wife loved them so much, and it's that same ex that travels the world, leaving behind a pink Magus that lets Max learn his new arts, although I literally didn't know about these until after finishing up the game. Yeah, I did think he only had 1 art, but I didn't really think too much of it honestly, okay? He's also very dumb, and Ayla, his second in command, does everything for him. Also, she's in love with him for some reason, and I would like to have words with her, and potentially recommend a brain transplant. Last up is someone you have in your party for literally a single dungeon, Racheans Forest, the previously mentioned pot salesman. Well, he's actually a royal knight, and the one that Princess Orenda is in love with. It's so painfully obvious he's much more than he seems, but the party, but mostly Farah, trust him, and she ends up telling him literally every single detail of their journey, even though they were fresh off being given the death penalty. This leads Ras to talk about his plot MacGuffin Seyfert Key and tell Farah she has deep trauma and issues she needs to work through. He's a nice guy, although he is loyal to the royal family, meaning that eventually he does work against the party at the top of Mount Farlos, but he does come around to help them at Balir Castle. Unfortunately, he does die at this point, but not before making sure Reed knows how to use the Divine Aurora, meaning his sacrifice allows the rest of the plot to develop. He's a great character. I wish he had a little more screen time, but since his death is so integral to his character, I guess it would be weird to shoehorn him into any other scenes. Also, Keele sounds like he really doesn't care at all that Ras dies in front of him. It's really funny.
Ras!
Ras!
Ras.
No!
Speaking of reading the mood, the music here is so good at setting the tone for areas and cutscenes. Areas like Peruti, which has 2 distinct but similar themes for when the town is covered in ice. And when it is freed, which uses the same instruments in different ways to convey 2 polar opposite emotions. Some of my favourite tracks will be Mount Mintche, since I love a good synthesizer. Forest of Temptation, but not as a standalone track, simply because I think it's really creepy and suits the location. The ruins of Vault hyped me up for disgusting creatures I would see within. And every single underwater location actually. As much as I did not enjoy exploring that map, the vibes were immaculate. Honestly, there aren't really any tracks that I disliked. Well, apart from the replacement opening that we got in the West. I understand that it was all licensing issues and all that, but what an insane downgrade that was. Thankfully we've moved past all that now, but please go listen to the original if you've never heard it. I would play it here, but I think I would get arrested. Now for the real test of a game OST for me. The battle themes. Thankfully there are separate themes for each world, for both normal battles and for bosses, and I have to say I vastly prefer Celestia's. Inferia's normal battle is good, but I'm honestly not the biggest fan of the boss theme. This feels a little bit all over the place, particularly when the woodwind part comes in, and I know that makes me a hypocrite since my favourite Destiny boss theme was the literal pots and pans, but hey, let me live. In contrast, Celestia's normal theme is a banger, and its boss theme is even better in my opinion. I just think it gets me so much more hyped up, and hearing it for the first time against the actual devil that was Gnome was insane. The final boss theme is also pretty great, although honestly I was too focused on trying to hit the right button combo to win to pay attention too much. Also, why did they make Giselle so pale for? That's not what she looks like in her beautiful full art. Did Hoyoverse make this game? Also, I think it's so funny that music is so important to my and many others' opinions to games and visual media as a whole, and I find it so hard to say anything beyond, yeah it bangs, I love these instruments they used, unless it's bad. I think we as a society need to learn to speak better about things we like. Yeah, I'm making it a society thing so that I'm not the only issue, alright? Also, we need more banger OSTs, that's all I'm saying. I spoke a lot about the story earlier, but I also wanted to mention now about some events towards the end of the game, so spoiler warning again. Something I liked about the whole thing was Reed being the chosen one with the fibril necessary to wield the Aurora art, and as much as his struggling to accept this and working towards saving the world was great, I liked that he wasn't the only one with this power. Obviously Ras was also chosen by the gods, but it's my reading that the nature of the fibril is irrelevant to what the user does with it. What I mean by this is, if the roles were reversed, I believe that the innate power of Fibril would have allowed Nereid to possess Reed if he ever reached the emotional low that Giselle did, and vice versa. Like, I don't think Farah's father was an inherently evil person, nor was Giselle to be fair. It's just unfortunate that a god of destruction found them rather than the god of creation. I do wish that Nereid got a little bit more fleshed out however, since we only really get a passing mention of Vattengeist, the land they resided in before the creation of Eternia, a little bit before the final dungeon, and honestly, I wasn't the biggest fan of it there. Now don't get me wrong, I think visually, the main areas looked great, like where Secundes is, and the area with the Eyebird Ball and all, but then it just sort of degraded into 6 elemental areas that didn't have much cohesion, and in a fight with the same enemy 6 times with different elemental weaknesses. It felt a little bit disjointed honestly. Reminded me more of the ending of Ocarina of Time rather than the Tales game, but the final sections more than made up for that. The final fight and confrontation with Giselle is great. I'm glad that Meredy got some closure with the death of both of her parents, and the final fight was tough, but not so difficult as to be frustrating, even though I did get the Aurora wall button pressed wrong on my first attempt, so I had to do the whole thing again. The final scenes with the separation of the two worlds I actually really enjoyed. They managed to integrate the gameplay concept of fringing the Kremls into the story in order to stop the Grand Fall. And even though I've made my opinions known on them, seeing a final scene between the two couples was nice. Also, Giselle turned into tentacles? What the hell? Okay, now that all the important stuff is out of the way, here are a few random things I wanted to mention, but there's nowhere else to put them. Irene Rembrandt is just randomly chilling in both Tunisia and Chambord, and she will exchange lenses you find around the world for items. She's kind of jarring to look at, actually. In the Celestia overworld, there are reptiles that have the Ultraman colour scheme. Why would they do that to these small creatures? The Wonder Chef is back, and they're hiding themselves in plain sight by pretending to be random objects, including a drinking man in Barole, which is insane actually. The actual recipes are really handy though, especially for TP regen. I didn't get all of them though. I just want to mention again that half the enemies in this game are horrifying to look at. What was going on in the designer's brains? Can we get them a wellness check please? The people of Inferia have fantasy terms for time and distance, which is great. I love world building stuff like this. Give me yams over yards any day of the week. Why is the giant water well that drowns criminals in the throne room? Did the royal family love killing people this much? Undine has a real attitude in this game. She's like, oh, you can't touch the fire? Sucks to be you, I actually don't feel heat. I like that the Kremls have personality in this game. Mount Farlos is a fortune teller that asks literally 10 million questions to find out which Kreml you are. I got the wind Kreml. Honestly, the Kreml Express minigame would have been more bearable if Meredy could have walked a few more feet to deliver those letters. Guess we'll never find out about their car's extended warranty. There's a clothes picking minigame in Peruti, and oh my god, I spent like 10 minutes doing this because I'm stupid. There's some fun references in here, but Jesus, I wish there was a little bit more direction. There's a few cutscenes towards the end of the game that had the wrong voice lines, and I don't know if I did something or if it's just the PSP version, but it was pretty funny honestly.
Help? Oh, I see. We can't understand her, but we sure can.
And finally, the Sorcerer's Ring makes another appearance here, with an ice variant, but honestly it's only used a handful of times, so it's easy to completely forget it exists. Oh, also there's a lot of extra stuff that I haven't done, which is probably worth mentioning, but I literally don't know about half of it, so hey. I know Arch is in there somewhere. All things considered, I really loved Tales of Eternia. The story, characters, music and graphics all together add up to an incredible experience that will stick with me for a while. I will say, Meredy is definitely going to be one of my favourite characters in anything going forward for a while, and I will absolutely be bringing my robot game theory forward. We'll see if Amuro Ray is my next victim. Overall, I'm going to give Tales of Eternia an A. I would highly recommend giving this game a playthrough, especially if you love a minigame. Both the PS1 and PSP versions are similar enough apparently, so whichever one you can get your hands on works. Although maybe the new remastered project will bring this back someday. I'm writing this before even Grace's re-releases, but they said they'll try and do it consistently, but this is Bandai Namco, so who knows. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Thank you so much for watching, and I just want to say thanks for watching anything I put out. I'm really glad that I have this channel to allow me to put across my thoughts, and I'm glad I finally went through with actually making these videos. I've been a chronic yapper my entire life, and I've thought about making videos for a long time. There's even a 33-page long script on Futariwa Precure on my Google Drive that I will never make because, Jesus Christ, do you know how long that would take? Also, it's just not a good script, let's be honest. Anyway, thank you so much again. If you liked the video, please leave a like, comment or subscribe, it would really mean a lot to me. If you have any comments or criticisms, please let me know. As for the next video, most likely it'll be the Eternia anime since I've seen there's some big differences in there from the game, so I'm excited to see those. Otherwise, it'll be Destiny 2 next, which will be interesting considering it's the only game as of writing which doesn't have an English translation patch, so that'll be a fun challenge. Anyway, that's for next time, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again.